I start to hear little plinks against the roof, almost like rain. But it isn't rain. It's ash. What is your most terrifying, we need to leave, story? Years ago my boyfriend owned a truck tire repair company. He stopped by a customer's house unannounced one day to try to get a check, as they owed a lot of money. When he came out of the house he was pretty shaken up. He explained the man's numerous other brothers were there, unusual, everyone was very jittery but they cut him a check and then rushed him out. He had a scary feeling that day. 2 days later that customer and his brothers were arrested for a murder that they had committed the night before we stopped by. I remember when I was with my nanny once and we were driving down the mountain she lived on. A baby bear waltzed out onto the road and stopped to just stare at us. She hit her brakes and just sat there. It was like a good 5 minutes wait, but the cub finally moved on but she didn't move. I asked her why, and she pointed out of my side of the window, because of that, and I looked over to see big old mama bear meandering along after the cub. That was terrifying, but at least we were in the car so we could make a quick getaway if we needed to. Was riding my bike home from a friend's house when I was a young teen, over 20 years ago. We had both lost track of time so it was dusk when I left. Lived about a mile away. Was traveling down one of the last roads to get home when I had this weird feeling, so I turned around to look back down the road. Saw headlights pass, stop, back up and turn on the road I was on. It was a pretty long road without many houses and no street lights or anything. As soon as they turned I bolted into the woods and hid pretty far in. The car slowly drove by and kept going. No idea what they were doing, but I didn't want anything to do with it. Hurricane Florence a year ago. We planned to ride it out as we were on a hill and in an area where the winds wouldn't be bad. Mostly ignored the news too. The night before, I got this huge pit of fear in my stomach and begged my dad for us to go stay with my sister a few hours inland. He fought with me about it but I finally convinced him. We came back a week later to find a tree fallen into our house, the house full of water. A tornado formed in the woods behind the house and pushed the tree up a 45-degree slope into our roof and through our house. Now, I will always trust my gut feeling, no matter how stupid it seems. I was walking in my old local park with my sister. We entered the inn at about 3 p.m. and were hanging around until at about 9:30, we saw 3 people all wearing somewhat similar outfits all the way on the other side of the park. I immediately noticed but don't think much of it. We walked for about 2 more minutes and I noticed one of them stopped and was staring at us. I immediately had a bad feeling and told my sister we should leave. She noticed and obliged. Later that night there was word of a stabbing in the park and the suspects were all the people we saw in the group of 3. I was camping with a friend in a backwoods camping area, not very many sites and they were all super spaced out. We had already been there one night, had the site fully set up, we had been hiking all day, the works. We drove into town to get some food, and when we were driving back to our secluded campsite we passed a man walking out of the only road to our site. We both locked eyes with him and I got a super creeped out feeling. He stared at us like he knew us and hated us, but we had never seen him in our lives. When we got to our tent we went inside and everything we had in there was tossed. Our bags were dumped out and our clothes were thrown everywhere. We quickly realized both our hunting knives were gone, along with a bunch of our clothes. We also realized it had to be that guy we saw. There were no other sites or hiking paths he could have been walking from besides ours. We jumped in the car and drove back towards where we had seen him. He was gone. We drove a bit further and found a common area where other campers were gathered. We sprinted down and asked, "Have any of you seen this guy?" and described him. The people at the gathering just stared at us and didn't speak, giving us an even more creeped out feeling. It was at that point that I told my friend we need to leave this place right now. Walking back to our car we looked over the edge of a guardrail and saw all our stolen clothes in the woods. We gathered them up but didn't find either of our knives. Knowing this guy was still out there with those knives and that no one around us cared freaked us out so much, we packed the car up and ended our camping trip early. No way were we staying out in those woods one more night. My car was stolen the very night I moved into my new house in a very good neighborhood. The neighbors had warned us that the neighborhood was being targeted at the time. They mentioned a woman around the corner that opened the door for knockers in the middle of the night. They attacked her and robbed her and almost killed her. We had reported the car stolen and did the police reports when it happened. Well, 2 nights later in the middle of the night I hear a knock on the door and they said, "Open up, it's the police." Well, since I had heard the story about the other lady, I was suspicious and did not answer. I grabbed my kids and put them in my daughter's room because it had access to the roof from the window. I called the police to say that two men claiming to be police are pounding on my door. They said there was no police in the area and they're sending a car. Turns out, these same guys stole the car and came back for seconds. I did get my car back because they brought it with. I was walking by a long stretch of road with no houses. There was a cemetery. A van with two guys in it stopped to ask me if I needed a ride. This was in the late 90s, so it's not like hitchhiking was legal. I'm all, "No thanks, I'm nearly home." They wouldn't budge. They kept following me with the windows down, kept saying come on, just get in. At some point they just stop, and they start getting out. I was just a teen, and they were clearly 20-something. I just took off running. I must have sprinted half a mile to get to an alley, and hid by the nearest building near the road. I waited about 15 minutes before moving on to make sure they had given up, so they wouldn't follow me home. I was at a national park on vacation. The layout was kinda like a crater with a rim you can walk under almost all the way around. Had this major gut feeling of yeah, not going down there. Later that day, a lady was killed from kids throwing large rocks and tree branches into the opening. Definitely when my town got hit with the worst firestorm we've ever had in 2017. Thomas Fire. We knew there was a fire somewhere. Maybe another town? We weren't too worried. The power is beginning to go spotty, and the winds are howling outside. Then my roommate gets a call from a friend on the other side of town. "My house is on fire. You guys need to pack a bag." After the call was over, the power went out and stayed out. So we packed our bags, and I start to hear little plinks against the roof, almost like rain. But it isn't rain. It's just ash. Not 15 minutes had gone by, and I look outside. We live by a large hill only 2 blocks away, and it was burning. It got there so fast. I got back inside and tell my roommates we have to leave right away. This is when our neighbors started wigging out too. We had to then capture our 3 very scared and confused cats. It was so crazy to drive away and see only blackness ahead of you, but in your rearview mirror only flames. Our neighborhood and my home ended up being spared, however many of my friends who lived closer to the mountains were not so lucky. Me, my girlfriend, and her sister were walking around in a local park at around 9 p.m. Very safe town, absolutely zero worries. I saw another group doing the same, 3 guys. First I didn't think anything of it, but I noticed that they kept walking faster, and that's when the feeling kicked in. I just told my girlfriend faster, and apparently she was on the same page. She didn't even question it, and we basically ran to our car. The scary part was the 3 dudes sped up as soon as we did, and stopped as soon as we started driving off. Was on a second date with a guy who wanted to stop at his house to grab something, and invited me in. He was super hot, but I wasn't feeling comfortable with him for a reason I couldn't put my finger on. We get to his house, and it was just creepy. He was well off, and the house itself was gorgeous. Spotless, and totally sterile. Nothing on the walls, every surface empty. No books. No CDs. Nothing. I asked how long he'd lived there, and he said 5 years. While he was in the kitchen, he then asked me to go into his room, grab something, keys I think, from the top drawer in his dresser. I got the coldest chill up my spine, and immediately stepped closer to the front door. There was no way I was letting him come between me and the exit. He asked me again to go to his room, and I laughed and said, "No dude, I'm hungry, let's go." He asked one more time, visibly annoyed at this point, and I proceeded to pretend that I was a bitchy stupid girl, and made a fuss about being hungry and what the hell was taking him so long. He was pissed. So I walked out of his house down the sidewalk and made him follow me. We got to the car, and I kept pretending to be a bitchy clueless chick, and demanded he take me home. He did. In cold furious silence. Then, when he stopped the car in front of my place, he grabbed my face to kiss me goodbye. He bit my lip so hard I was bleeding, and he reached under my shirt and twisted my nipple. I luckily got him off me, falling out my door, and ran inside to the sound of him laughing. I ended up with a bruised face and nipple, cut lip, and was scared that he knew where I lived, but I still feel like I survived a legit serial killer. One day I'm coming home from work back to my parents' house because I was 18. I didn't live in the sticks, but definitely in an outlying neighborhood. Along the route home there are several places where many cars turn off of, as the traffic thins out. I'm noticing that the car directly behind me is following my every turn. Me being a dumb paranoid 18-year-old, I'm paying attention just in case there's some reason, but also laugh it off because I don't have any influence or piss anyone off, so that's just silly. Until he turns into my neighborhood. I'm like, okay, there's still plenty of houses. Makes the next turn with me. The immediate right is my street, a cul-de-sac. I make the turn, and he's still behind me. Instead of pulling into my driveway, I make the full circle and go back down the street. Hell, maybe it's just my neighbor, or said neighbor has a visitor and it's pure coincidental. At this point, I'm too nervous to look and see who's in the car, but it's definitely an older white male. I make another right, going further into the subdivision within my community. I know there's no exit. There's one or two more streets off to the right, but I don't know where they go. I know the end of the street I'm on in another cul-de-sac. He's still in my rearview mirror. This is the point I knew I was a target, but the neighborhood with its hills and my knowledge of the immediate area was of advantage to me. I gunned it up the hill past my assailant, back to the beginning of the subdivision. I make a right and again put pedal to the metal. If I was to get pulled over at this point, all the better. I make a mad dash for the main road and zigzag into another neighborhood. Go a few streets down and just sit there for about 5 minutes with the loudest heartbeat in my ears I'd ever heard. I have so much running through my mind. Did they know that's where I lived? Do they know I was in front of my own house at one point? Who could this be and what reason would they have to follow me? After a few minutes, I pulled back out and drove back home, keeping the sharpest eye out for this beige beast. But I never saw it again. To this day, over 10 years later, I have no idea who that was or why they were following me. I still try to make excuses for people I see follow me, but I definitely take it seriously when I'm getting close to where my family is. I currently live in an apartment complex, and if I have someone right behind me, we'll navigate throughout the lot so they can park first and get out of their car, before I go home and park. It definitely got me spooked. I was in an Irish bar in Bangkok with my wife, and a group of 5 very muscular Asian guys came in and started to drag a white guy out. The bar owner stood up and yelled, "This does not happen here." And amazingly, the 5 dudes listened and went outside to wait for this guy to leave. The owner asked the guy what's going on, and he said these dudes were going to kill him. At this point, the bar owner was trying to smooth things over and offered us some free beers, but I'm 99% sure this was actually an Irish mob-owned bar, and we were there at the wrong time. We were definitely in a hurry to leave. Long story short, we left and never went back. A coworker of mine went there later and told me the waitress urged him to leave because there was going to be a hit there that day. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more Reddit videos. Share your own "we need to leave" moment in the comments below.